Hi guys, and welcome to Debbie's Rusty Brush. Today we're going to be painting a cross, and we're going to be doing a multitude of different techniques and layering and sanding and just bringing to life a background, bringing out a lot of different textures, different methods of making texture, and just playing until we get something that we like. So if you want to see how I go about creating this unique, one-of-a-kind, because when you do this procedure, you're never going to be able to duplicate it again, because you're just throwing paint on, you're sanding back, you're adding layers, sanding back, and you might find an area that you really like, so you want to leave that and you work around that area with other layers and sanding back until you have an overall look that you really are pleased with. And so when you say that this is an original, it's an original. There is no copying it, there's no recreating it, even for the artist, because you're just doing it intuitively as you go with what is pleasing to your eye and what you like. So come along with me. We're going to speed this up so that you're not having to watch a long time, but it will take longer than my normal video, even sped up, because of the layering and the processes that we have to go through. So come along with me and let's get going. Okay, so we're starting on a 16 by 20 wrapped canvas, and this is Dixie Belle mineral chalk paint in blueberry, and now I'm going with some Dixie Belle sandbar, and I'll be mixing in some Dixie Belle cotton as well for the basis of our background here, just to get a good covering on our canvas and a good starting point to work with our layers. So now I'm just taking a little bit of the lavender that is of Dixie Belle, and I'm putting in the cross that I want to put on here, so I have an idea of where I want it. And now we're going in with some Dixie Belle amethyst, and just kind of putting in some shadows to that, and just adding more to our layers. And we're just going to go through and make some drips and some runs, and some of this may sand back through, it may all be covered up, it just depends where we go with, but the process is to just make layers and have fun with paint until you get something that you like and you want to keep. Now, I missed a little portion of film, but I have some Pennies from Heaven from DIY Paint. It is a copper patina, and I've mixed it with a little bit of water and a little bit of golden extender, and I'm just putting it at the bottom of the cross and trying to get it to run down the canvas. And so now I'm adding a little bit of water with my mister bottle to help it run some more. Then there again, just another layer. Now I'm taking some golden impasto paste, and just putting some texture in where I want my cross to be so that it has some buildup and some texture. And I'm just putting in the cross and getting some texture to work with so that when I go in with my colors and my palette knives, I can have something to skim across the top and have it catch the different colors that I put in there and give it more of a raised feel. So now we're just going to go in with another layer. I am not going to be putting this on the cross itself, but what we're using now is a little bit of cake batter and some white. This is all DIY paint. I like it because it's clay based, and so I can get and build a lot of texture with it. So this is Queen Bee, and I'm just mixing these colors in. Fancy Farm Girl's going in now. I was just checking to see how the impasto paste was doing with drying. It dries clear, and there is a little bit that's still a little wet. So I'm just going to continue to layer these colors, and as I said, all of these layers are going to be DIY so that I can get the texture that I want out of the paint itself without adding more below. You'll see I'm talking with my hands a lot through this. This was done live on my Facebook page on this portion, and so I'm talking through it. That video is still over there on Debbie's Rusty Brush at Facebook if you'd like to run over and take a look at it live. A little bit hard to do live because you have to wait for it to dry, and so you end up using a hair dryer because you want those layers. And so this is just the process that I go through. You can see that there's no rhyme or reason as to how I'm putting it on. Some of it I'm skimming across the top, some of it I'm blending on the canvas. I'm just getting these layers and colors on there. So far I've got white, Fancy Farm Girl, Queen Bee, and Summer Crush, and a little bit of Sandy Blonde going in there. Now, you'll see me go in with some of the Amethyst, and that is a Dixie Belle product. So I'm just playing and having fun, and here in a little while we'll let it dry and do a little sanding. So while we're doing some drying, I'm just taking a brush and putting in a base coat on the cross itself. This is layered chocolate. So I'm going to do this layered chocolate, and then I'm going to go in with a little bit of prairie gray to give it a little bit of depth and dimension and have that other color in there. And we will do a little bit of layering and sanding on the cross as well. So this is just a good place to start with the base coat. So what I'm doing now is taking my putty knife and adding in some texture. And this little piece of equipment is a cleaner for a George Foreman grill. And I've found that I can make some interesting texture with it. it's going to make grooves in the paint as you drag it through, and it will be different when the paint is wet versus when the paint has started to dry some. And so right now I've done some hashtagging, cross-hatching, and just drug it through in an S pattern. Did some marking up with my palette knife or my putty knife, and now I'm going to dry it a little bit with the hair dryer, and the top section there is what we're going to work on because it was not as thick there, and so we're going to be able to get that dry and get in with our sanding on that area. Now what I'm using is a little piece of 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm just sanding that down. And with DIY or any of your chalk paints, you can do a wet distress as well. And so I pull out a baby wipe. I'm doing some wet distress. Also, when you get it wet and you go back in with your sandpaper, you're going to get a little bit deeper of a sand with that. It's going to come off a little bit better. Now, anytime that you do sand with this mineral or clay-based paint, you're going to end up pretty powdery, and you're also going to take away quite a bit of your texture because it's going to smooth it out. But you're going to want to wipe it down just to get that sanding dust off of there and have a clean slate again. Now I'm going in with some of the amethyst just to add a layer and see where it takes me and what we're going to do with our background from this point on. Now, because I was live, I purposely made that layer up there pretty thin so that I would be able to dry it and move on and show a little bit more layering process as we go along. So here I am, it's dry, I'm sanding some more, and as you can see, it changes the color. It lightens it up because of all the sanding dust as you're going. So that's why it's important to wipe that back off to get an idea of what you're doing. Now see, I like how it's broken up there and made the color a little different. Okay, so it's important to note that you can also do this process using acrylic, and I have done that, but acrylic does take longer to dry. And so when I do acrylic, I might have a couple of different boards going for backgrounds that I'm just playing on and doing shapes and colors and sanding back. And I just continue to play daily until I have something that I think would make a good background for something that I want to do. And then I will use it for that. So with the acrylic, it is a much longer process because it takes longer to dry, and it also takes longer to sand because it is the plastic versus the chalk or the mineral and clay base, which sands pretty easily even with water or with a sanding paper. Now I'm going in just on the cross here and putting a little bit of mermaid tail in there. It's a turquoise color, and that's just to add some dimension and a layer on that. I'll also go in with some old 57 and add a little bit of that in there while we're waiting on the rest to dry. Now you notice there I went ahead and took my mister bottle and spritzed the canvas itself with a little bit of water. Just helps it do a little bit quicker on the distressing on that and bringing back different areas. And so, like I said, there's areas that you might like a little better than others. Now I'm putting this amethyst in this cross hatching, and then I'm wiping it back and giving it more of a watercolored look. And then the amethyst is sticking down in that cross hatching that I did with the George Foreman cleaner. And it's sticking down in that cross hatching so that you have those darker lines down in further with the more muted watercolor look on top. All right, now I've got that George Foreman grill cleaner out again, and I'm running it through semi-dried paint. And so it's dragging the paint a little bit different, making a little bit different, not so much the even marks that it made in the wetter paint. It's making more of a clumpy texture with this because I'm dragging dried paint or semi-dried paint. And it also brings some of that paint out into the rest of the painting that you're doing. And now here we are the next day, just going in and adding more layers and playing and seeing what we like and what we don't like, adding a little bit more of the colors in there to get a little bit more going on in the background, and to just begin that layering technique again, and seeing what we like and don't like, and just playing until we find something that is pleasing to us as we go along. It is important to note that there is no right and wrong with this technique. You just play. Put the paint on the canvas, take some paint away, add more paint, play with your colors, what goes together, what doesn't go together, if you're wanting light, if you're wanting dark, where you want the light and dark in comparison, if you want more neutrals, or you want more bright colors. So you just go through, and there is no right or wrong. You can go through and put circles on, or triangles on, or serpentine marks in. It's whatever you want to do. What I'm doing now is just picking areas that I want some color in there and areas that I want more neutral. And I'm going through and just kind of skimming across the texture that we have made, and so it's bringing in just spots of paint on the high spots of the texture that we have there, and I'm just trying to bring in some more interest into this background, and get something that pleases my eye. So we're going in now with a little bit more layered chocolate on our cross, and getting a little bit of the teal and turquoise layer that we had put on there, covered up and giving us something to sand back to. The sanding back gives just a little bit different look to that layer. You'll bring some of those teals back through, but it'll come back through differently than it was laying on the canvas to begin with. All right, so now I'm layering on some folk art. It is the only acrylic that I use in this painting. It is some folk art gold because I like to have a little bit of shimmer and shine. I will go back in here in a little while and use the pennies from heaven, which is the copper patina, and it also has some shimmy shine to it. But I do want some extra shimmy shine on the cross itself. And it's important to note that when you're using a chalk-based or clay-based or a mineral-based paint, that as it dries, it lightens up. And then when you seal it, whether you seal it with wax or you seal it with a polyacrylic or a spray, it's going to lighten back up and brighten back up at that time. So it can be a little bit deceiving in the fact that you may really, really like the mutedness that you have going on. And then when, as you see, I'm wiping the dust off, but I'm also adding moisture. And so it's brightening those colors back up. So you may have something that you really, really like when you're working with this type of paint. And then when you seal it, it changes and the brightness comes back. So what I will do when I'm unsure what I've got going on is I will take a little extra time. I will spritz it down with my mister bottle. You don't want a spray bottle. You want one that mists. And I will spritz it down with my mister bottle, and it brings back all the vibrancy of those colors. So it will look like it does when it's sealed. And you can tell just where you are with your brightness and with your colors before you get to the point where you're committing with a sealant. And so I do that frequently because it does take a little more drying time, but it gives me a good idea of where I'm sitting with my painting. All right, so this is an acrylic paint and it's just mixed with some water, and I'm just putting it on there and letting it run down the canvas so that I have that extra. It's not a thick texture, but it looks like texture. It's just that runny drippy. And then I've also done the same thing with the pennies from heaven, the copper patina, and that it too is just adding some more dimension, some more texture. Some people really like the drippy, some people not so much. It just depends on the application whether I like it or not. I really enjoyed it with the look of this cross. I like that drippy. I like the free-flowing background where it has some movement to it. I did decide to soften those drips with sanding back some, and as you can tell, they're still very much there, but it did soften a lot of the lines of them going down. And now I'm going back in with some more of my layered chocolate and just doing another layer here on my cross. And so it's covering up some of the gold. The reason that I chose to do this was because I really didn't like how my drips ran through the cross. I wanted the cross to be more on top of that background than to be part of.
So I wanted to take away the drips that had gone over the cross itself. And so I went in with layered chocolate. I go back in with some prairie gray to give it that dimension and the highs and lows. And then I'll go back in with some of the gold and a little bit of the pennies from heaven, where it's not dripped through, it's just brushed in there, so that it has the shimmer without having that look of it being in the background or part of the background. I wanted it to stand out a bit more. I will also go through and add a little bit more of the teals on there to bring that color out. Doing some sanding and a little bit of aging to the cross itself. Now, I decided that my cross was just a little too perfect, and I wanted it to be a little more worn, and so I'm just going in with some White Swan from DIY and going over the top and the bottom and a little bit on the edges here, just to give it a little bit more of a worn look, and so that it's not so perfect. I wanted it to have that time-worn look to it. I don't know how else to say it. I just like the look of that. Now I'm going to go in with some oil pastels, which seems a little odd when you're working with chalk paint or an acrylic, because oil and water do not mix. But I'm going in with some black, and I'm just adding some darkness to the edges of this. I'm not being precise. I'm just kind of scribbling it on there and giving it just a little bit more dimension, a little something extra. I have found that the clear spray will go on over the oil pastels, and that it looks just fine and it holds up just fine. Also, if you're a little worried about it, after you clear coat, you can go through and actually use some of the DIY wax on it. If you want, you can use the colored wax, or you can use a clear wax, and it will mix well with that as well. So you can go through and do that if you're wanting a little bit more protection, or if you want to add a little bit more dimension using your waxes like you would on furniture. You're just using it on canvas. With this particular canvas, I didn't feel the need to do that. Okay, that's our finished painting. All right, so if you guys could let me know in the comments, would you like me to leave it where there's no music, or add some music in there in the areas where I'm not doing a voiceover on this? If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and hit that little bell, and it will notify you anytime I upload a video. And thank you for spending some time with me. Bye-bye.